Hello, this is the Chapter 20 walkthrough of my personal notes. Remember, you can find this Word document in the Week 5 questions thread under the My Notes post. Okay, so as the human population expanded, hundreds of species have become extinct, and thousands more are endangered and threatened with extinction. And this especially includes all the megafauna from after the last ice age. These changes represent a loss in biological diversity, or what we call biodiversity, which we covered a little bit in the previous weeks. Biodiversity loss goes hand in hand with the disappearance of natural ecosystems. About a quarter of the Earth's land surfaces remain untouched by human alterations, and our activities have had an enormous impact on the aquatic biomes as well. So even if we don't necessarily interact with an area, we can still F it up. Biodiversity is short for biological diversity, the variety of living things that you learned about in Unit 3. It includes genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. Thus, the loss of biodiversity encompasses more than just the fate of individual species. When species are lost, so are their unique genes. There are frozen zoos to try to maintain some of this, but they're pretty much gone. For examples, researchers are currently scrambling to stop the spread of a deadly new strain of wheat stem rust, a fungal pathogen that has devastated harvests in eastern Africa and Central Asia. At least 75% of the wheat varieties planted worldwide are susceptible to this pathogen. But researchers hope to find a resistance gene in the wild relatives of wheat. Think about when this happened to bananas, the Dutch elm disease, all sorts of things. The present rate of species loss may be as much as 1,000 times higher than at any time in the past 100,000 years. Several researchers estimate that at the current rate of destruction, over half of all currently living plant and animal species will be gone by the end of this century. When was the book written? Was it written in 20? I think it was written in the 2000s. Okay. Just trying to remember. Ecosystem services. Functions performed by an ecosystem that directly or indirectly benefit people have been lost. These vital services include water and air purification, climate regulation, and erosion control. An estimated 20% of the world's coral reefs have been destroyed by human activities, and 24% are in imminent danger of collapse. Scientists predict that another 26% of coral reefs will succumb in the next few decades if they are not protected. How could we protect them? What steps are being done? Things to think about. Ecologists have identified 4 main factors responsible for the loss of biodiversity: habitat destruction and fragmentation, invasive species, overexploitation, and pollution. How can one individual help with this? What can you do as an individual? What can a group do? What can a government do? What can the entire world do if we work together? The massive destruction and fragmentation of habitats caused by agriculture, urban development, forestry, and mining pose the single greatest threat to biodiversity. The single threat worst is going to be habitat destruction, right? Which is implicated in the decline of 73% of the species in modern history that have become extinct, endangered, vulnerable, or rare. So it's all these things lead to destruction, loss, right? Tigers, the American bison, the Galapagos tortoises are among the terrestrial species whose numbers have been drastically reduced by excessive commercial harvesting, poaching, or sport hunting. Overharvesting also threatens some plants, including rare trees such as mahogany, rosewood, that produce valuable wood. Think about seed banks in here and what we do to try to save some of these. Acid precipitation is a threat to forest and aquatic ecosystems. Dust and rain. Aquatic ecosystems also may be polluted by toxic chemicals, nutrients, and other contaminants. So what can we do to try to stop this, to limit this issue? Air or water pollution is a contributing factor in the declining populations of hundreds of the species worldwide. How does it affect humans? What happens to poor nations if they can't get clean water, clean air? Let's scroll down. Interspecific, so between interactions, that is, interactions between species can be good or bad. Interspecific competition It's between species competition. The population growth of a species may be limited by the population densities of competing species as well as by the density of its own population. What determines is whether populations of the community compete with each other. Each species has an ecological niche. You can say niche, niche, whatever you like. I like niche. I don't know. Makes me happy. Defined as the sum of its use of the biotic and abiotic resources in the environment. So it has like a certain role that it plays in the ecosystem. So what happens if you mess up its role? Or someone else wants to take it. If the ecological niches of two species are too similar, they cannot coexist in the same place. Ecologists call this competitive exclusion principle. So that's what happens with a lot of invasive species. They have the same role and they'll outcompete and the other thing will die off. In another experiment, Gauss found that Paramecium quadratum and Paramecium bursari could coexist in the same habitat, but both populations were smaller than when the species occupied the habitat alone. So it might be possible, but you shrink both populations. Depends on who's superior or if they're about the same. So let's talk about mutualism. This is if both species benefit from an interaction. For example, symbiotic root fungus associates with the mycorrhizae and are mutualistic. Mutualism can also occur between species that are not symbiotic, such as flowers and their pollinators. You know, you could also look at this as like the flowers, you know, kind of the predators, the pollinators, to get them to come over. Depends on how you look at it. Predation refers to the interaction in which one species, the predator, kills and eats the other, the prey. Because predation has such a negative impact on the reproductive success of the prey, numerous adaptations for the predator avoidance have evolved in prey populations, right? That's our arms race that we talked about in the last chapter. Camouflage or cryptic coloration, talked about this a little bit last week, makes potential prey difficult to spot against its background. Warning coloration by bright yellows, reds, or orange in combination with black often marks animals with effective chemical defenses. So you know, like if they taste nasty or they're poisonous, they're probably going to be yellow, red, or orange. One way I think about this is if you imagine like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, he's always got a rocket attached to his back, and it's usually red because it's dangerous. So we're using the same color systems in our own world. Let's scroll down to different types of stuff. Herbivory is the consumption of plant parts or algae by an animal. Although herbivory is not usually fatal, a plant whose body parts have been partially eaten by an animal must expend energy to replace the loss. So you think of overgrazing with goats. Think about what Greece looked like before the goats were there. In the San Diego Zoo, they have mountain goat exhibit. That used to be lush chaparral area. The goats just ate it all completely down to rock. So even just an herbivore can have a massive effect on the land. A parasite lives on or in the host from which it obtains nourishment. Pathogens are disease-causing bacteria, viruses, fungi, or protists that can be thought of as microscopic parasites. You know, beefworm, tapeworm, all that stuff. Ticks, fleas. Lives on or in. Yeah, so it can be a flea. Let's scroll down. Scrolling. Alright, so here we're going to have, let's see, scroll up. Can we see it all? So we have at the top, we have quaternary consumers, tertiary consumers, secondary consumers, primary consumers. At the very bottom is going to be our producers. This is an example of a food chain because there's just one line that goes up, right? So if you have a plant, it's going to be eaten by the first consumer, primary, which is our herbivore. I'm just going to do the plant side. It's kind of the same concept on the water side. After the herbivore, it's going to be a carnivore, and that's our secondary consumer because it's a step up. Then we're going to have another carnivore who's usually larger, and those are tertiary consumers, and then you're going to have your top dude in your food chain who is usually the quaternary consumers. This can include humans. Let's scroll down. The feeding relationships among the various species in a community are referred to as the trophic structure. The community's trophic structure determines the passage of energy, because the energy starts with the plants and it goes up the system, and nutrients from plants and other photosynthetic organisms to herbivores and then predators. The sequence of food transfer between trophic levels, so consumer, producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, blah, 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 consumer, is called a food chain. I would also stick in there the decomposers, which would kind of be off on this side, but it makes me happy. So autotrophs, which ecologists call producers, this is a photosynthetic producer, uses light energy to power the synthesis of organic compounds. If you're underwater, you're going to have a different type of producer, especially if you're in the deep ocean. It may not necessarily use photosynthetic, but it's producing its own personal food. Same concept, right? Okay, all organisms in trophic levels above the producers are called heterotrophs, or consumers, and all consumers depend directly or indirectly on the output of producers. So I can't produce my own energy, so I'm going to be a consumer. Herbivores eat plants, algae, phytoplankton are primary consumers. We can get more specific. You have frutivore, herbivore, or omnivore would eat meat too, right? So different types of vores. Primary consumers on the land include grasshoppers and many other insects. So once you consume more than just a plant kind of thing, so if you become an omnivore or a carnivore, you're going to be up a level. You won't be in the primary, you'll be in the secondary. Snails, we're going to hate snails. We had like an overpopulation this year, it was crazy. Certain vertebrates and other grazing mammals, birds eat fruits and seeds. All organisms in trophic levels above the producers. Did we just say that? Yeah. I'm going to erase that. It looks like we repeated. Oh, nice to know. I even have gone through these notes how many times, and I still find stuff wrong. Need to stick them through right points so it can really yell at me and be like, everything's wrong. I think I just hit page up. Let me pause for a second while I figure out what the heck I did. I actually do what I meant to. Haha. Higher trophic levels are going to be your tertiary consumers. These are like the snakes that eat the mice, or the secondary consumers. Most communities have secondary and tertiary consumers. The figure indicates there's also a higher level, which is your quaternary. These are going to be your top dogs, right? Your keystone predators, which I'm sure we'll define soon. Some consumers derive their energy from detritus. This is like death. The dead material left over by all the trophic levels, so it would be animal waste, plant litter, dead organisms. These are called detrivores. I can see that so much better. Which are often called scavengers, consume detritus. They may occupy any consumer level depending on the source of the detritus. I tend to put them off on the side so it kind of loops out, but whatever. A great variety of animals, including earthworms, many rodents, insects, vultures, are detrivores. Detrivores in aquatic communities can be catfish, crabs, crayfish. Decomposers, consisting of prokaryotes, fungi, protists, secrete enzymes that digest organic material and convert them into inorganic forms. So kind of the same concept. And then we have omnivores. These, including humans, these are producers as well as consumers of different levels. Thus, feeding relationships in the community are interwoven, right? You can eat anything. Apparently, I need to put a video in there someday. Whatever. Things to do. Species diversity of a community. These are the variety of species that make up a community. Has two components. The first component is species richness, or the number of different species. The other is relative abundance, so the proportion and representation of each species. So it's like everyone left in the community human or something else. Let's go through keystone species and then we'll end the video. Keystone species is a species whose impact on the community is much larger than its total mass or abundance. The term keystone species was derived from the wedge-shaped stone at the top of an arch. And it needs this for everything else to be effective, right? So it might be a producer, it might be your top predator, it might be every single species if you look at it. I hope this helped for the first part of Chapter 20.